Welcome to the Dream Boat. Remember, you can join the DRI for just £30 a year. You get access to more content, including videos and discounts for our events. It's a great way of finding out more about our work, joining our dream community, and supporting this podcast. Details in the show notes and at driccpe.org.uk/membership.
Welcome to the Dream Boat podcast, a place where we talk about everything dreamy, all you wanted to know about dreams and where you might find some answers. My name is Laura Payne and I'm a psychotherapist and associate of the Dream Research Institute, the DRI, here in London, England. And I'm joined by fellow psychotherapist and TV presenter, Melinda Messenger.
Hello, I'm Melinda Messenger and I'm also part of the Dream Research Institute, and together we're a group of dream weavers and catchers, and we're called the Dream Boat because we are recording our podcast by the canal here at Little Venice in London. So listen out for the ducks.
I love talking about dreams, working with them and exploring them. So join us for this fortnightly series when we'll be looking at dreams, talking to experts in the field and answering your questions.
In the show notes, you will find ways of getting in touch with us and the team via the DRI website and on the standard online places such as Instagram and Facebook. And our social media links are all in the show notes. So let's now get on with the episode.
So today we're going to have a really fascinating chat all about dream incubations with Sarah James of Dream Mysteries. Now, Laura, you spoke to Sarah, and I know that this is a subject that you're really passionate about. You've done lots of research in, and I'm really excited to hear this. But also, you've got some other really interesting news coming up.
I have indeed, yeah. So a lot of people know that I'm really interested in the Asklepios method, so the Greek method, ancient method of dream incubation for healing. And I've done a lot of work and run retreats, mainly within the UK. But I now, thanks to Sarah James and the DRI, we're going to team up. And I'm going to announce right now that we're going to lead a dream retreat actually at Epidavros, which is the Greek home of incubation. And I'm going to be doing that with Sarah James in May. We're only going to be able to take 12 people with us, but it's going to be the most amazing trip, following in the footsteps of the god of healing, the Greek god of healing, Asklepios, and testing out temple sleep actually in his sanctuary at Epidavros. I mean, it's just such an amazing opportunity. And we're also going to be visiting other dream oracle sites and doing fun things like early morning dips in the sea and meditation and obviously lots of yummy Greek food. So the DRI is going to Epidavros. And if you want to join us, sign up.
I mean, it sounds like an incredible opportunity for so many. I mean, how rich. And to go to the kind of the sort of epicenter of it all, it's just going to be wonderful. And of course, if anybody does want to join, and I really do think this is an incredible opportunity, then all the details will be there in the show notes. They'll also be on the DRI website. But I think this is the perfect time to listen to your interview with Sarah.
Well, as discussed, I am now joined by Sarah James from the Dream Mysteries. Sarah, many thanks for giving some time today to talk about what is, for me, as our listeners know, is an amazing subject. So I thought I'd just kick off with a basic, actually. What drew you to dream incubation?
Well, ever since I was a little girl, I was really interested in dreaming. My childhood dreams were really significant and important to me. My ambition was to make a machine that could record my dreams and make people watch them as films. So I kind of saw it mostly as this amazing creative faculty. And I loved the imagery from my dreams. And I guess it was a sort of self-feeding, self-fueling interest, because my interest in dreams led me to be interested in any books, any TV programs, any films about dreams. And then that just kept sort of feeding my dream life. And, I loved Alice's Adventures in Wonderland as a child. That was my favourite book. And so my dreams kind of started to take on a Wonderlandy type of landscape, I guess. And one of the things I like working with in workshops is dream mapping. So sketching out, drawing out the landscape and the environment that people find themselves in dreams. Because I think there's I have sort of ideas around the dreamscape being like a kind of memory palace for the psyche, like you're constructing your soul and personality in the dream space more so than you do perhaps in your waking reality. So yeah, I've always been interested in it. And then one thing happened when I had my daughter. So when I had my daughter, I had like maybe 2 years of broken sleeplessness, and I wasn't lucid dreaming. I wasn't having great vivid dreams, and I was depressed and miserable. And once I got the dreams back, I appreciated them even more. And that's kind of what led me into exploring dreams therapeutically, I suppose. And I'd already read a lot about dreams and studied dreams a lot, but I started to host a lecture series. So prior to me having my daughter, I had hosted gigs and shows. I promoted mostly American bands and promoted psychedelic concerts and was really into loud music and concerts and touring and all this kind of stuff. And once I had my daughter, I was like, oh, I want a more kind of relaxed, tame, philosophical type of activity. So I started a little local lecture salon where I live on the south coast of England. And I've always had like a very sort of diverse, eclectic range of interests. So we had people come and talk from everything from like sex robots to all sorts of psychology topics, about psychedelic substances, about history. And I very quickly realized that the thing that really I'm the most geeky and passionate about is ancient culture and history and ancient perceptions of reality and philosophy. And so some of my favorite lecturers, we had a lecturer who specialized on the Mesopotamian city of Ur. And it's like the more detailed and the more niche and the more specific it is, the more I like it. So during lockdown, that turned into, I changed the club into basically being an Egyptology lecture series. And through that, it was really interesting because I met lots of Egyptologists, but it gave me the opportunity to interview Egyptologists who specialized in dreaming and sleep. And that was fascinating. And so I realized there was this incredible niche that I could occupy, which was ancient culture and history of sleeping and dreaming and how it might be applied in modern times therapeutically.
Yeah. Wow. What an amazing journey into the world of dream incubation. And so, of course, it took you to Epidavros. Tell me a bit more about your journey and your quest into the Asklepian method. Those listeners who remember one of our earlier episodes will also know it's a love of mine.
Well, for me, I wrote and studied about the sanctuary of Asklepios at Epidavros for many years and was interested in it for many years. But when I eventually got there, it was properly like love at first sight. I just completely and utterly fell in love with the place. It's like, I think places have feng shui, like perfect feng shui, and Epidavros has perfect feng shui. I can understand why it was an ancient healing holistic center. There's something about it. You're kind of embraced by the mountains. Then you have this beautiful, serene, Saronic Gulf, and the hills are really lush and wooded. There are springs there. The place is like littered with temples and ancient. It's just, to me, it's like heaven. So I arrived and instantly I was like, this is, perfect feng shui. This is like the perfect place to live. And it does have that effect on people when they come for a retreat. It just has this instant calming effect on people's nervous system. Like you just see people transform within a couple of days. And then I was just very lucky because I was telling people how much I loved it. And another lady who was on my retreat loved it as well. And we were saying, we love it. And she had stayed for a little while in another hotel before she'd come on the retreat. And the owner of that hotel said to her, well, if you love it so much, my cousin's got like a bungalow to rent. And so she said, well, should we go and look at it? And so we went to look at it. And I was like, yep, I'll have it. It's amazing. So we just started renting this little bungalow. And originally we were going to split it, but she hasn't ended up going there at all. So I took over the rent and I'm just paying it. And now I'm homeless in the UK, but I'm staying with my boyfriend when I'm in the UK. And then I just rent now in Greece.
Yeah, wow. Was that the birth of Dream Mysteries as a company?
I'd done a lot of events and retreats and a lot of lectures and things like that in the UK and in Europe, but I did realise that there's something absolutely unique and impossible to recreate outside of the context of the actual place. Like, there's a much deeper sense for how this works, and just the kind of imprint of those thousands of people that have gone before you, and the structure and the landscape and everything about it feels different to be there in person. And, you know, the area where Epidavros is a very sort of mythologically rich, historically rich, culturally rich area. Like, everywhere you go, just outside the village is the world's oldest bridge, the oldest bridge in the entire world, which is quite amazing because there's like hardly any signage for it. And then you have all these ancient cities that, you know, Pausanias has written about, or they're written about in Homer. And up the road from me is the baths of beautiful Helen. And like, the whole place is just woven through with all these stories and myths. And it just enriches the experience of dreaming there. And people have incredible experiences when they sleep. I do like sleep hypnosis in the incubatorion. So quite often, the wonderful thing about the Sanctuary of Asklepios is, although you get loads of tourists visiting the theatre, which is why it's famous, they often don't even look at any of the rest of it. So the incubatorion we often have to ourselves, and we could spend like a considerable amount of time there. And especially off season, there's very few visitors. So it is incredible to be there. And, you know, the incubatorion is sort of still partially standing as well. So you can actually go into the basement area and have some sense of what that space felt like.
Yeah, that was the area where they kept most of the snakes as well, wasn't it? I think did the Asclepian snakes live down in the pits in there?
The snakes that they say were used therapeutically, or the sacred serpents of Asklepios, were this particular species of tree snakes. They weren't really underground living snakes, but when you read the descriptions of how healing happened, they often say that the serpents came out of the Avaton. So this is like the kind of the holy of holies. So this Avaton is a Greek word, and it's used to describe any inner sanctum of a sanctuary or a temple. So, and it means the place where you can't step foot in there. It's like sacred space. So only the priests and only the sacred serpents of Asklepios could perhaps be in the Avaton. But it's really interesting because it's also the area where surgeries were taking place as well. So there are loads of surgical artifacts that have been discovered in that area of the sanctuary, you know, scalpels, knives, and all sorts of surgical equipments. Like, you know, they employed all sorts of healing modalities. So massage was very important therapeutically, and obviously cold water bathing and purification and catharsis and all these kinds of things.
I usually say to people when I'm working in that way that, you know, it was the birthplace of Western medicine. They were prototype hospitals, you know, famous doctors like Hippocrates, Galen. It was in the Asklepions that they started their training and developed what we would call now today modern day surgery.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Well, I think, you know, Chiron is trained Asklepios, and Chiron trained Asklepios in the healing arts, which included surgery, but also included singing soothing tones to patients at the bedside and things like this.
We should explain that Chiron was the centaur that Apollo gave his son to be looked after and brought up.
I think that's the thing that really interests me about this ancient Greek approach, is the holism of it, like the absolute holistic appreciation for the human organism being a multi-dimensional, part material, part immaterial entity. And I think that's something we could do with returning to for modern medicine. So that's something that I'm very interested in. And Aegea, who is Asklepios' daughter, she's often described as being the personification of health or cleanliness, but it's more than that. It's like the personification of soundness, wholeness. It's like harmony of the constituent parts of the human being.
Yeah, we should also say that Aegea is where we get the word hygiene from. So I can see why we miss out some of the more fundamental aspects of what she represented, because we get hung up on the word hygiene as the association without thinking of the wholeness that goes with it. And so people then at Epidavros with you, you actually do sleep hypnosis with you, do you, in the sacred area? Tell me a bit more about how that works.
Well, one of the things, I've got lots of friends who will come and visit me in Epidavros, and they're like, oh God, do we have to look at another field with stones in it? Like, without the context, without the story, these places can feel a bit lifeless. But I think there's so many stories around Asklepios, and there's so much myth around the activities that occurred in the sanctuary, that I like to kind of bring it alive with stories and tell people the myths of Asklepios and how he became a physician and how he learned to bring the dead back to life.
And was punished for it.
Yeah. The fact that the springs still run in the sanctuary of Asklepios as well is really interesting. So in a lot of places, in especially that part of Greece, the springs have run dry, but the sacred spring that comes down from Mount Kynortion is still running. So even though there isn't a kind of ritual fountain that we could collect waters from, the taps that are all around the sanctuary are still using that spring water. So we have like a kind of purification, I like to, I suppose, sort of creatively represent every aspect of the healing process that occurred in the Asklepios. So we do things like dream theatre, because theatre was a healing technique to bring about catharsis for the pilgrims. So by watching these like emotional, dramatic tragedies, they would purge their like bitter emotions or their suffering. They could release that suffering by sympathizing with actors and being moved. I went, last time I was in Epidavros, every year for the summer, they have a big Athens Epidavros festival of ancient Greek theatre. So I went to see the Bacchae last time I was there. And even in this very scaled down modern representation of the Bacchae, which, would have had a chorus of maybe 50 singers in ancient times, and this had maybe 12, you still were moved. And I think there's something also about the acoustics, because that's something I've been doing a lot of research into recently, is the acoustics of the whole center are really considered and consciously. Yeah. So the acoustics of that theatre are especially famous, and it's supposed to be one of the most acoustically perfect ancient Greek theatres ever. And because they don't amplify the plays even now, you do get this real sense of being moved by the sound and the way the sound travels and the energy of the sound and the energy of the singers. And, even in that small way, it still feels you can really understand how a theatrical performance could have a powerful effect. And if you think that, in ancient times, the performance of the Bacchae would be much more emotional and intense, and there was a sense that they were enacting a healing rite, it would have been even more dramatic. And so you've got the theatre there. And so we do things with dream theatre, and it's kind of like it's a sort of combination of psychodrama, I suppose, and constellation therapy, because you're working with dreaming and you are directing players in the dream that you've had and trying to come up with new insights.
It's such a powerful technique, isn't it, to use to explore a dream? We do it as well, and particularly around using the Asklepian methods, I find it quite fascinating. Just hearing you talk about the famous amphitheatre at Epidavros, I often try and explain it to people. It's a bit like Cineworld meets a top-end spa, meets a hospital. It was all of these things combined into this massive centre of healing. It's an amazing concept.
There's, in Epidavros, there are various legends about where Asklepios was born and how he came to be. But obviously the Epidavrions that I know, that he was born in Epidavros, and he was left on a mountain that is called Titus or something. It means nipple in ancient Greek. He was left on Nipple Mountain and suckled by a wild goat. And so part of the reason why this idea that Asklepios did come from Epidavros is his association with the wild goat there, because in other sanctuaries he's not associated with the wild goat. And most other sanctuaries around the world will refer back to Epidavros as the foundational, most important centre, and the most money was lavished on its construction as well.
And it's not a small site, is it, when you
No,
go?
it's huge. And also, even today, when you go to the archaeological site today, quite a lot of it is outside the boundary of the modern archaeological site. So, for example, there's a temple of Aphrodite that's outside that footprint. There's a beautiful nymphaion that I saw last time I was there. So it's a little shrine to the Muses around a spring. A small chapel's been built on top of it, dedicated to Saint Anne. And above that is the original shrine from which the whole sanctuary developed, that was dedicated to, first of all, a kind of unnamed Mycenaean goddess, and then later on Apollo Maliatus, who's like a local form of Apollo.
Wow. And so when people come on retreats with you, obviously they get a chance to incubate their own dreams. Have you had some interesting Asclepian-style dreams with some of the key imagery coming through?
Yeah, most people have dreams that feature Asclepius and serpents. And yeah, it's an interesting process because I've always felt that it takes you 3 days or 3 nights to recalibrate to a new environment. So I like to do retreats that at least incorporate that 3-night thing to allow for that. You can get interesting dreams on like the first night because there's the novelty of sleeping in a new environment. And the places that we do stay in Epidavros are very sort of serene and relaxing. Like I say, it does sort of speed up the relaxing process. So yeah, most people will have dreams that feature Asclepius and the serpents. But one thing that I absolutely love is so many people have contacted me before coming on a retreat saying Asclepius told them to come. And then they look up Asclepius and they find me and they're like, wow, like, so I need to go on this retreat. And there's been a couple of people who are convinced they've had past lives where they worked there, which is amazing to go there. And the last one I did, I was with a lady who remembers being in the Asclepia, and she could describe all of these things. And we were taking a path that I'd never taken before down from the shrine on the hill all the way into the sanctuary. And she remembered stopping off at certain places along the way. And she had an incredible experience of really feeling like she'd been there before.
Yeah, I very rarely talk about this, but before I got involved in this type of work, I went to a workshop where you were encouraged to meet your guides, as in your spirit guides. And this dude turned up and wearing sandals and his Greek costume. And I didn't quite hear the name properly to begin with. And I thought you said he was Asklepios. I can't say the name properly, the playwright. And he said, no, it's not that. And basically said, look, it's Asklepios. He said, and I know you will just go away and you're going to look this up, and which I did do, obviously. And it was really quite fascinating. And then just shortly after that, a piece came on Radio 4, which for international listeners is part of the BBC. It's the main talk radio of the BBC. And it was looking at dream incubation. So it started talking about Asclepius, and I'd never heard of it before. And I did do a bit of Greek at school. And but it also looked at the cult out at Saqqara of Imhotep, which is meant to be the Egyptian counterpart. And that sort of kick-started my interest with all of this. And then by chance, I had an opportunity to go to Epidavros. And I really felt I'd been there before. Yeah, it was so surreal. I felt so comfortable. Yeah. And so when you say about people saying they've had past lives or he's come to them in dreams, God, I really get it.
It's happened a lot. And it's like historically recorded that Asclepius would visit patients and tell them to go to his sanctuary. So I love the idea that that's still happening. And I have to say, like, I've never felt as at home as there. And I don't know whether I maybe in a past life had anything to do with the cult of Asclepius, but there's something in that area. I mean, I had because one of the sites we also visit is the Sanctuary of Demeter in Kore at Elefsis, where the Eleusinian mysteries took place. And that is a place that really struck me deeply. And there are just places all over the shop. It's an amazing amazing landscape. I was with a friend of mine recently, and she was talking about how it's something like 90% mountains. And that really informs the character of the people and the character of the culture. And there are shrines and temples on nearly every mountaintop, like there are just temples everywhere. And in the region where I live, just down the road, there is the Kanathos spring where Hera restored her virginity every year. And there are just all these sort of mythological places where one thing that happens is, because it is such a sort of mythologically rich landscape, is everything does start to feel a bit dreamy straight away. But yeah, the fact that people have dreams that tell them they should come to Epidavros, for me, is amazing. And I've had numerous dreams where I have met deities and they've given me instructions. And I met Asklepios a long time ago, but he was dressed as the man from Del Monte. And he told me that I needed to fast for 3 days. And that was very useful advice. So yeah, it feels like a really natural when I'm on that road driving down from Athens, I just feel like I'm going home. It's the most beautiful place.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about that, because when I've done some Asklepian workshops, many people, he does turn up for many people, and they've not, really read anything or know anything about it. But he often does come with very directive things you should do, particularly in terms of food, what to eat or what not to eat, which would have been one of the classic ways of healing as well at the time. And effective messaging as well. People who've received the messages have gone away and thought, yeah, that's exactly what I need, or have tried it out and it's made a big difference in their lives.
Yeah, I found that, certainly.
Yeah. So I know that you're planning also some work in Egypt. You're going out there. Tell me a bit more about that.
So, as I was saying, when I was running my lecture club, I kind of quickly realised that ancient culture was my most favourite topic. From, I suppose, like a philosophical and spiritual angle. I've had lots of Egyptologists been guests over the years, but the topics I found most interesting were the ones that really sort of opened up questions about how do people perceive reality in ancient times, and can we get ourselves into the same mindset and start to see the nature, the world, and people in the same way. And actually, when it comes to dreaming, it's a really fantastic insight into how people did perceive their reality, because one of the fundamental differences in dream interpretation in the ancient world is it was completely preoccupied with predicting the future. So that suggests that ancient people completely believed that the future was something that could be experienced now. All dream interpretation pretty much is about predicting the future. It's never really an analysis of the dreamer's personality. It's about identifying the clues and finding the patterns that can reveal the future. And then the future isn't also set in stone. So in the Mesopotamian tradition, the future kind of generally unfolds badly for someone if they've angered their personal gods. So you'll receive dreams from your personal gods telling, nightmares. They're sent to you. And one of the interesting things about ancient dream culture as well is this idea that dreams don't come from within. They are sent to you, or they arrive on you, or they travel like entities of the air. So you can imagine how much more terrifying a nightmare is if you think that it's an entity that's been sent to you by a demon or is a demonic entity in itself, is a sort of demonic spirit of air.
Makes me think about the notion of the incubus that in more modern times people feel is sitting like on their chest or something.
There did seem to be something of a preoccupation with nightmares in ancient Egypt. And I think in Mesopotamia and in Anatolia, there's descriptions or ideas expressed in the texts that talk about how nightmares shorten your life. And to experience nightmares is like a punishment from the gods. And that was very interesting to me. And there are descriptions in ancient Egyptian texts that explain situations that feel very much like sleep paralysis or night terrors. Egypt has always really fascinated me, and certainly in terms of dream cultures. And during lockdown, I started to teach myself hieroglyphs. And I realised
you
that
do.
I think all kids should learn hieroglyphs. It's like an amazingly sort of multi-dimensional, interesting way of considering language, because they're pictograms, but they also have phonetic values, but you also can't help but make visual associations when you read them. So you're starting to make these multiple visual associations based upon pictograms that also represent like sounds. So it's just a fascinating, amazing mental exercise to learn hieroglyphs, and a beautiful meditative act to ink them with like a reed pen. And, you know, you have to paint hieroglyphs slowly, and it just makes you slow down. And I found it an amazing practice. But anyway, one thing I did notice is hieroglyphs entered my dreams really quickly. And I started to see texts in hieroglyphs. And I think there's something about them where they're just really compatible with the way we process or generate dream content, because they're so association based, and dreaming so association based, that you can't help but make these associations. And I came up with this idea that, you know, for literate scribes in ancient Egypt, because hieroglyphs represent the real things of the world, and in Egyptian, the word for hieroglyphs is meduneja, which means God's words or divine words. The hieroglyphs comes from the Greek, which means sacred carvings. But because they do represent the real things of the world, for someone who is literate, if they went out into a town, for example, say like 5 things might line up in reality that could be read as a word. So it makes sense that they're the God's words or divine words, because they are the things of the world, the things that manifest into the world that make sense. So you can make sense of your experience in reality. So I think Greek is very interesting, because actually more words in the Greek language derive from ancient Egyptian than I think people give credit for. But ancient Greek acts as a sort of bridge language between the pictograms and the hieroglyphic scripts and what we recognize as modern alphabets today. So Greek describes the real things of the world, and it's almost like ancient Greek is a kind of Lego language where components can be put together to make new words. So I think about the example, like the word chrysanthemum means golden flower. And if you know Greek, then you know that the word chrysanthemum represents a golden flower. So it kind of is very sort of descriptive and simple but complex and beautiful language to really succinctly express concepts and ideas. And I think
rich.
Yeah, I think that it acted as a bridge for Egyptian and communicated some of those Egyptian ideas really well. So it's a good place to start studying those things. So anyway, Egyptian concepts around especially things like the soul and the afterlife really interested me, and dreams. So I'm doing a couple of retreats in Egypt this year with my friend Mervat Nasser, who's a Hermetic philosopher, and she runs a retreat center in the middle of Egypt, which is kind of based upon Hermetic principles. And she's just an extraordinary woman. She bought a patch of desert in the middle of Egypt. God knows why, because she's also one of the most sensible people I've ever met. Really clever, really sensible. She worked as a psychiatrist in the UK for 30 years. And something possessed her, probably Thoth, to buy this patch of desert. And then she dug for water, found water, built a pond for growing blue water lilies, then built a swimming pool, and then constructed all these individual little dome dwellings around it to make a retreat center. And each dome is made out of the same limestone that was used to case the stones of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Pyramid of Khufu. So, yeah, it's amazing. And then one of her main objectives as well, because she's very much into this Hermetic idea of bringing, creating heaven on earth. So she's tried to increase the biodiversity of her land like dramatically. So she's basically turned a patch of desert into an oasis. She's tried to reintroduce a lot of the species in Egypt that were threatened with extinction. So she's put in an olive grove. She has reintroduced the sycamore fig, and blue water lilies are actually quite rare, and she's growing those. And it's just kind of lush oasis now, which I that's the sort of thing that I just think that's worth everything.
What a great place for a retreat, particularly to explore the Egyptian dream incubation techniques.
Well, it's really good for dark skies there as well. Yeah. So she hosts sometimes astronomy groups, because the skies are really great. In Minya is where the White Desert is.
Yeah. Well, it sounds absolutely magical. I feel another episode coming on just round that as well. But so just going back generally to dream incubation, have you yourself had any very, very powerful dreams out of while you've been working, particularly in Epidavros?
Yeah, I have a lot of powerful dreams of Asklepios, and I've been working a lot with myths, with Greek myths in recent years, and I'm really fascinated in how story and myth influence dreamscape. So that's something I work with a lot. I work with a publisher in Greece, and I do some of their in English translation works. And although I actually am learning Greek and I can't read a whole book in Greek and I can't speak Greek very well, I had the job of translating their best-selling book about Greek myths. And it did actually already have an existing English translation, but I worked with a sort of triangulation of the existing English translation, the Greek text, and using like online translation tools, and then editing as well, because the text contains lots of Greek idioms and Greek references.
Anglicize it.
Yeah. So that was amazing. So I spent a month working on that. And one of the projects that I'm working on now is doing a kind of updated Pausanias. So I don't know if you know, Pausanias was this very famous ancient Greek travel writer. And if you want to kind of find out about any area in Greece, you go to Pausanias first and look up what he's written about somewhere, because he traveled extensively all around Greece. And he made a note of all of the remains that were left of all of the temples, and then described all of the myths and all of the stories that the locals told him at the time. So it's like an invaluable record and archive of Greece at his time. And so he's written a lot about the Peloponnese, obviously. So the project that I want to do now is a Pausanias now. So go to all the places that Pausanias went to in the Peloponnese and update them with what you see there now, which is actually not too far off what Pausanias would have seen, although some of the idols and temples have been a bit more destroyed.
What a lovely idea. And I think one of the questions I was going to ask you, do you have a favourite Greek myth of your own? Which one speaks to you most of all?
Good question.
Currently.
Well, I was just working on this book for this. So this book that I translated is by a Greek author he's known as the mythologist. He's very, very popular on YouTube. And he talks about how Eros and Psyche is his favourite. And I think Eros and Psyche might be my favourite as well, actually. Not to copy him, but I got really into translating that chapter. I really loved it. And I remember as a child, and I really took it to heart, the story of King Midas. I always thought that was a very valuable lesson. And yeah, there's lots. There's lots.
Anything in particular you like about Eros and Psyche?
I guess I like thinking about it in a sort of philosophical, like more than just a romantic relationship, thinking about that relationship of love and soul. And what is the story really saying about how the soul activates love and how love activates the soul.
And the labours of love to get that point of transformation.
Yeah, and I guess in some ways it reminds me a bit of the Descent of Inanna, which I did quite a lot of work on, this kind of like stripping yourself down to the essence and the kind of pure beauty of the soul, being immortal.
Sarah, I could talk with you for hours. It's absolutely amazing. Loving your work so much. Thank you for spending some time with me today. And we are looking at a joint project of some kind, so to be continued. And so thank you very much. Wishing you well with all of your work and all of your dream incubation work and retreats. And we will have in the show notes links of how you can find Sarah Janes.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura.
So, yes, dream incubation. It is an amazing subject and people are still playing with it today. And Sarah Jane's knowledge is immense. She's run retreats both in Greece and she's looking and other parts of the world. And also we're hoping to team up with the one that she's going to do at some stage into Egypt as well, which will be just something else. The links between the Greek healing god Asklepios and the Egyptian deity, well, not deity, but he was a priest and became a deity, Imhotep, is so strong. And it's, the theory is that perhaps it sort of led its way through Egypt into Greece, and the Greeks just adopted the dream culture. But again, very similar method of, basically lying in these abatons, which were like dream caves, for want of a better description, to incubate your dreams. And as we discussed, the Greeks had these 5 images in particular that they were looking for that were the sign of healing. So it was normally the Greek god in some way, or an old man they could be the Greek god. A dog that was often seen, it was like a psychopump, an animal that takes people from this realm to another realm, normally the realm of the dead. A cockerel, the young boy Telemachus, which was often seen as a dwarf-like figure, but you often see these little figures of boys on Egyptian tombs as well as in Greece. So there's obviously a crossover of some kind. And then obviously the last thing being the snake. And so the Asclepian snakes, they're still called Asclepian snakes today, but they were very much part of the temple culture and they roamed freely. I mean, well, we won't have any snakes on our retreat. I'm promising that, I hope, unless they are ones from the area, but I'm not going to give you snakes.
Or maybe in the dream world where they're, permitted.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And it's amazing the number of people when I do these retreats, because I encourage people, I send the images before we actually go on retreat so people can start to immerse themselves properly and start getting into that dream culture. And it's fascinating the number of people who will, pre the retreat, dream something hugely significant that then plays out during the retreat. And we pack it with all sorts of interesting things. We get you to draw your dreams. We get you to act out your dreams, which we're hoping to do within the temple site at Epidavros as well. There's a chance of doing psychodrama together at the home of, where there is this massive amphitheatre that's so famous, where all the Greek plays used to be staged. So it's going to be a load of fun, and Sarah Janes is a great host as well.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely credible. And there's something about actually visiting these kind of ancient sites, because you kind of tap into the energy of the place, and that sort of acts as an amplifier, doesn't it? So, you've already got that intention set before you go, which is wonderful. And of course, the psyche usually does get on board with that. And like you say, presents a wonderful dream. And then to go to the place where it's just sort of rich in the energy and the history. It's an amplification. So it sounds utterly wonderful.
Yeah, I think it's a real privilege for the DRI to be able to offer this, because it's almost like taking dreams back to its source. And I love what you say about amplification, because there really is. When I've worked in other sites before, and I have been to Epidavros, and it has something very powerful that sits there, because it was the centre of medicine for a couple of thousand years, probably. I might be a bit wrong on the dates, but anyway, for centuries. And it, like a lot of these Asclepions, and there are about 320 dotted around the Mediterranean, Epidavros was seen as probably the most important. And they became the sites of what you and I would now call hospitals. And so famous doctors started to practice there, like Galen and Hippocrates. That was where they trained. They would go to the Asclepion for their training. And the work I've done with people who've come with something specific for the retreat, normally a weekend retreat, they've come for something specific. Their dream world has always shown them a particular route. It has been quite fascinating as a piece of research to see it play out.
Absolutely, and even how you're describing these places and the medicinal value, how they later became hospitals, just goes to show the kind of healing energy that's sort of available to be tapped into in all of its different forms. And our psyche presents us dreams for healing, in just such wonderful ways. So this is going to be a really beautiful opportunity, I think, for 10 lucky people.
12
lucky people. Even
like
better.
12 lucky people, exactly. Yeah, so if you are interested, the links, as we said, are in the show notes below and also on the DRI website. Look forward to welcoming you there. So, thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to like us and leave comments on your favourite podcast platform. As I'm sure you know, that's the way we build an audience for the Dream Boat podcast and also to spread news about dreaming. And as we said, there are many ways you can share your dreams at the DRI, the Dream Research Institute.
Yes, we have courses, events, and workshops, and we want to hear from you. So check out the show notes for links or find us on Instagram and on our Facebook page and on our website at driccpe.org.uk. And if you want to explore your dreams further or you would like to support us, you can join the DRI as a member for just £30 a year. As a member, you will get discounts for all of our events and short courses. You'll get our newsletter with latest dream research news, and we'll also be adding other special member benefits during the year. Of course, members' dreams will always be given preference for reading on the podcast Dream of the Week slot. So go to the link on the show notes and become a DRI member today. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.